Hi, you're with Julian on the Brown Note and Liz Truss, Crumbmaiden of the apocalypse, and she must be stopped, and she must be stopped soon. So we've had recent years showing that the Anglosphere Western world is in terminal decline and yet will still continually vote to kick itself in the face. We reached what we all assumed was endgame with the three amigos, Murdoch-appointed goons, in Boris Johnson, Donald Trump and Scott Morrison. And yet America managed to throw those shackles off, even though they're far from out of the woods. And amazingly, Australia said, nope, Mark III stupidity was enough for us, thank you, and went the other way, and we got rid of Scott Morrison. Thank God. The UK, however, has decided to upgrade to Mark IV with Liz Truss. The worst, stupidest, most incompetent, vile Western leader yet. Zero intelligence. I mean, you only had to see her on the campaign trail. Unelected, a dangerous maniac in power with no electoral mandate at all. So she's come out with these tax policies, or her treasurer has, that. So the UK's basically had 10 years of Tory financial misgovernance, like Australia, which you don't really hear reflected in our news media, despite the ever-growing deficits, income inequality, cost of living, all of which has come to a head in our country and in the UK, even worse in the UK. And at that point, she has decided that giving massively expensive tax cuts to millionaires is the way to go, which the rest of the world, including the financial markets, went, what the? And the pound collapsed to the lowest rate against the US dollar since the pound was invented. And the international monetary markets have also, who normally love all of this neoliberal, this is like the ultimate neoliberal economics package, are saying, you know, putting hundreds of billions in debt onto the budget at the moment when you should be helping poor people, and actually the government has indicated it could cut benefits for the poorest in society to pay for tax cuts benefiting the rich. So their mantra of tax cuts for wealthy people, which is pretty much, you know, that's virtually all that right-wing governments are here for. Look at Donald Trump, $1.2 trillion in tax cuts for rich people. And then he left. And the notion that this is actually a good paradigm for what the Tories want to do with the UK, which is privatise everything, massively cut down on anything that the public own or that the public manage, and put it all to their private sector buddies, who will then run it worse at a profit. And the old, you know, are they buttering up the UK to have such a bad economic situation they can turn around and say, we can't afford the National Health Service anymore? Who knows? I think ascribing genuine motivations based on stuff like that to people like Liz Truss is assuming a level of intelligence and competence which just isn't there. They see these things in a petri dish and they just run with it. I mean, it's the most Tory thing ever. She has like, you know, the stuff that the Tories say in quiet, she has just said loudly. That's what all of them want. With things so bad in the UK, none of the Tories would actually try and promote that agenda at the moment. They'd wait until things were better before doing it. But, you know, it's cartoon evil. It's like, you know, let's send children back down the pit. You know, I voted for the Satan is eating my children party and was shocked when Satan ate my children. This is, every time you think that they can't get worse, they actually do. You know, you think we got, in the UK, we got David Cameron, and he trashed the entire country up by forcing a Brexit vote on to win an election, and then fled. And then we got Theresa May, who got nearly undone by Jeremy Corbyn. If only the world would be so much a better place. Jeremy Corbyn who was taken down by the most vicious onslaught from the British press we've ever seen with a political leader, even though they knew that would give us Boris Johnson and Brexit and the calamity that we've got, purely because he wasn't a Blairite. And he did have some stern things to say about Israel, so they went nuts on him. And spent years trying to take him down. And I'm talking about the lefty papers like The Guardian as well. So that was disgraceful. And then we got Boris Johnson and Brexit. And just when you think it can't get any worse, he loses his job as well. But we got round 4. It should have been stopped with Cameron and Brexit. That should have been the end. And we could have had Jeremy Corbyn, the best Labour leader of my lifetime, with a raft of brilliant policies, a truly honourable man. You know that because the press are going out of their way to do everything to create the same mindset the British public have about unions, where they're, you know, this enemy, this, like, or the Greens in Australia, where the press works overtime to foment this picture of this great evil that's terrifying. Absolute garbage, of course. I had said that Australia has the worst news media in the Western world. I would say that I'm wrong, because Britain's print news media is the worst in the world, in the developed world. They don't only have the Murdoch Press and the Sydney Morning Herald like we do. They've got the Murdoch Press telling every working class person in Britain that the Tory Eton educated tossers are the people that will look after their interests, and the Labour and lefties and the unions are the thing they need to fear, despite the left never having done anything to them in their entire lives that's been bad, and everything bad that's happened to them and their country coming from the Tories. Most of them will still vote Tory tomorrow. They have the Daily Express, they have the Daily Mail, they have the Times, they have the Sun. They have so many organisations. Jeremy Corbyn was up against nearly the entire news media. He had all of those papers and the left-leaning papers like The Guardian after him. Just like with Bill Shorten in Australia when they started going mad about retiree tax in the Sydney Morning Herald, there was no one to offer support. We had the BBC going after Corbyn relentlessly with some of the most one-sided journalism a public broadcaster has ever offered. So I think that the UK's press has done an even bigger hatchet job on the UK's populace, half of them at least, than they have in Australia. And don't think that Liz Truss is solely bad for her tax cuts. In just a few weeks she's been in power. She's now offering to move the embassy in Israel to Jerusalem to follow Donald Trump. She wants to bring back imperial measurements. Seriously. She is a dangerous maniac ideologue. And people in her position with no support will run to the most egregious support base that she can get. Because like Boris, like Scott Morrison, like Tony Abbott, and like Donald Trump, they are all in it for their own ego. They don't care what they do once they get in power. They just want the job. And this time around we're going to end up with a Labour government for sure, because it's like it happened the last time around. We nearly had Kinnock in the 80s in Britain, but the Sun newspaper managed to put a kibosh on that right at the death, and then we spiralled on for a few years until it was so untenable with corruption and malfeasance and incompetence that Tony Blair walked to an election victory that any Labour leader would have, and who the press, the pro-Blair press, have always maintained was all about him, even though any Labour leader, including John Smith, who died out from the election, would have won the next 2 elections for Labour. And then the third one, Tony Blair lost 70 seats, 60 to 70 seats, and no Blairite has won since. We now have Corbyn ousted, despite the fact that he would win a popularity contest to be the Labour leader right now. Why don't we try and find that one out? We have Sir Keir Starmer, a Blairite, and he is going to win the election. And exactly what happened with Tony Blair and what happened with Albanese is going to happen, because it always happens with Labour. They will say only this moderate Blairite centrist kind of Labour can get elected. Crap. up until these unending calamities with the Conservative Party, Keir Starmer was a footnote. No one cared about his tactics. Just like Anthony Albanese in Australia, they're now saying, oh yes, encourage Labour to be less like Labour because that's how Albanese won. Albanese was being destroyed by Scott Morrison until the rape of Brittany Higgins started dominating the news, and then for about 18 months we had scandal, corruption, obnoxious ScoMo on the news being an idiot, evading responsibility. He lost the election. Anthony Albanese didn't win it with anything to do with his tactics. Scott Morrison was hated by the public come election time. That is why Labour will win in the UK. Nothing to do with Keir Starmer being a Blairite, and we will hear from the likes of the press for the next 20 years, see, we told you, only Blairite, centrist, neoliberal-esque Labour parties can get elected. I wish more than anything that we could have reversed the position of Keir Starmer and Jeremy Corbyn so that Starmer got the unwinnable Brexit election against Boris Johnson, which no Labour leader would have won, and Jeremy Corbyn inherited government the same way that Keir Starmer is. And then we can go around saying, look at these lovely socialist policies, those crazy ones like Jeremy Corbyn wanting to nationalise the power companies to protect against future rate rises. Just madness. But Liz Truss does need to be stopped because the amount of damage she looks capable of doing, it is time for her own party to intervene and take it down. They've already proven they have pretty low standards, but she is extremely dangerous. She needs to be stopped.